Hi, I'm Eoghan Simpson and I'm here today with Chris Matthew from Flannery.
Good morning.
Hey, and so we're going to talk about demolition and the challenges the industry faces when it comes to managing plant and machinery. So I think you're a good person and best suited for this podcast, Chris.
Well, no, thank you for inviting me, and hopefully we'll discuss a few topics that we'll find your audience will find interesting.
Yeah. So I think one of the first topics we wanted to look at, so the NFDC are a big advocate when it comes to sustainability and especially in demolition. So there's a couple of challenges I think our industry or the demolition industry faces. It'd be good to just get your perspective on some of the points that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, all construction, demolition as well, we've got an image challenge, haven't we? So demolition by its very nature is tearing down buildings. You made the point to me just a few moments ago off camera with regards to, it doesn't look very sustainable when we're creating mountains of rubble and there's a dust, noise, in terms of the impact that it has on the local environment. So I think all contractors, demolition included, have a responsibility to work proactively with all of the supply chain that are on site to try and minimise that as much as possible. And the context today that we're talking about is very much to do with fuel. So, how can we best utilise the machines that we're putting on site to use the minimum amount of fuel to do the work that we need to achieve?
Yeah. And it's an interesting one because it's similar to the earthworks and groundworks where if the machine isn't working, it's not efficient. So similar to where they're tearing down buildings, if it isn't tearing down a building, well then it's not efficient. So that utilisation is really important.
Well, there's a cultural challenge, isn't there? Because I think if you're setting up a demolition site, there's this perception that you need a certain suite of machines. And it might be led by what the contractor owns. It's what they've always used, so it's what they've gone out and they've invested in. And so they put those machines on site. But it goes without saying that every building is going to be different. It's going to have different requirements. It's going to take a different amount of time to pull down. Now, by virtue, what that means is you might need a particular tool or a particular machine for a certain amount of time, and then it might be stood idle for hours or days at a time before it's next required. So the challenge that we've got in the sector is to try and pick those moments, and is there a better way of doing it? Can we pick a different machine that we can use for multiple tasks? Or can we be brave enough to say we're going to front load all of our heavy duty demolition work with one particular machine, then we're going to send that machine away, we're going to off hire it, or at the very least we're going to stand it down, and that operator can then operate a sorting machine or a smaller machine which is more agile, more versatile for other tasks. And therefore, as back to your point, drive that utilisation up.
Yeah, that's it. And I think a big thing in the demolition industry is driver behaviour and just operator behaviour. Because it's very difficult to go out there and say, turn off that machine or kind of be more efficient without data and without information on what is actually going on out on site.
Well, it's a huge point, and I think it's one that we really need to approach with some sensitivity, because no operator wants to have a spreadsheet manager or somebody with an iPad stood sort of virtually watching over them saying, this is how you do your job. I wouldn't like it if somebody tells me how to do my job from behind a screen. So the clever thing here is about helping the operator understand how their behaviours are having an impact on site, and the small subtle changes that they can make which have a big impact on things like fuel consumption, fuel burn, but don't immeasurably change their day. We really do want to avoid that big brother approach of somebody thinking that they know better.
So I don't know if you saw recently, but the NFDC are really driving behaviour change for operatives and just that safety culture. What are you guys doing in Flannery?
I'm really pleased to see that the NFDC are doing that, because there's no such thing as a golden bullet. And what I mean by that is you can't just bring in a new machine and hope to change behaviour or change the performance of the machine and save fuel. So focusing on the operator to help them with that understanding, help them change their behaviours on site is really, really important. At Flannery, we've spent a lot of time and money investing in operator training. So we've built what you might have heard of, the operator skills hubs, which we're rolling out now across the country, which is a standalone facility away from the plant hire business where we can deploy plant trainers, bring our operatives into a safe, controlled environment and actually teach them some of the modern skills that's going to give them the ability to be better operators out on site. I'll give you some examples. Machine control is something that's not new. It's been around for 15, 16, 17 years in my business alone. But there's still this nervousness around deploying it on site. a lot of operators who might have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, they were taught the traditional methods of operating a machine, which is fine, it works today. But to deploy this new technology, needs somebody to sit on their shoulder for a little while and just give them some coaching in terms of how to, just to give them some understanding on how to set the machine up and how to read the digital displays that are coming off. So by creating that sort of safe space, using simulators, having plant trainers, we can actually give them the confidence that they know what they're doing, so that when they do go out on site, they can be hugely more effective. And also, it helps the operator with future employment prospects, because many sites are going down this route.
Everything's going down that route, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We have to become more digitised. And yeah, what a great example. So I suppose another piece the NFDC is really looking at is the whole sustainability side of things. So it'd be really interesting to hear from Flannery perspective what you're kind of doing to drive sustainability.
Sure, no, I think that's a good question. And there's loads of different ways to approach sustainability, particularly when you involve machines. I've already mentioned one aspect is machine choice, making sure you're selecting the correct machine for the job. And again, big data that MachineMax provides helps guide that plant manager in terms of how effective is the machine on site. The other important aspect is looking at operator behaviours. So a challenge we have on site is understanding idle time. What percentage of a typical working day should be made up of idle time? Now, I'll stress at this point, it's not like various programs we've got with regards to risk and zero harm. We're not targeting zero, because a certain amount of idle is integral to the machine's
productive
performance.
idling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But excessive idle, that's the phrase that I really want to emphasise, which is something that we need to understand and benchmark against other comparable industries and see where we're at. One of the things that Flannery does is this is in conjunction with the NOCN and the Supply Chain Sustainability School, is really focus on an eco-operator training course. Okay. So this is a course designed for the operatives so that they can understand their impact that they're having on the environment by the actions that they do on site, and also give them more insights in terms of how the machine needs to be set up to be the most effective it can on site. Pair those together and give them some practical experience both on simulators but also out in the real world. And then we can begin to look at the information that the machine is generating to see, has the coaching worked? Have we missed a trick? Is there something that we need to do in terms of re-educating that operator, bring them back in and potentially go through the cycle? Because what I want to stress is we don't always get it right. You know,
of course, it's a learning.
It's a learning curve for both ourselves, for the people, MachineMax such as yourself, and also the clients in terms of how they're setting up their sites. So eco-operator is that full view of, right, this is where we are today and this is where we want to be. These are the step changes that we need to make, and deploying that across all the sectors, including demolition, I think is really important.
Yeah, because I suppose demolition's an interesting one as well. I think when we looked at the idling figures, we're idling for about 40 to 50% of the time.
Which is more than in other traditional construction sectors. So it's an interesting challenge to try and dissect, and I think you and I could talk for ages in terms of why that might be. But I would speculate that, you know, demolition is quite an established sector. There are individuals who've worked in the demolition sector for years and years. And what I think is great about it is those individuals, those operators in particular, tend to work for a contractor around the country. So when they finish one job, they move to the next. That's great because you're retaining those skill sets.
And they're experts in their field.
Exactly that. Yeah. The downsides are that if those individuals aren't in receipt of that training, then they're less likely to be influenced by outside people coming in. So we really need to sit down with those demolition contractors to help them understand that they are idling on average more so than their construction colleagues. So why might that be?
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. I think collaboration and communication is key when it comes to construction projects. Why do you think it's different in demolition?
That's an interesting question. I think in construction, traditional construction, it's slightly more mature in terms of some of the groups that already exist. So, for example, a lot of organisations, Flannery included and MachineMax, work through the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is a great platform for sharing information. And it also builds up some commitments that not only the plant hirers, but the OEMs and the Tier 1 contractors work towards in terms of sharing knowledge, sharing data, and that has provoked some of this behaviour change that we've been referring to. There are other key clients, so for example National Highways, Network Rail and HS2 to name but three, have good working groups where we're all encouraged to come share ideas, sit down together and work through some of the problems that the industry faces. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that the demolition contractors don't do that, but I think it's more of a closed book. It's more of a closed environment. I think there's a lot of things that could be learnt from those other sectors, and it might actually help speed things up because you're not starting from the beginning.
That's right, and I know with the Plant and Earthworks project team that National Highways provide, there's a lot of sharing that goes on.
Yeah, and it's encouraged. It's part of, in order to contract with those organisations, we're obliged to do so, which kind of levels the playing field a little bit. So it's less of a threat to share what we might deem sensitive information or Flannery's crown jewels, for example. So when you've got a client that is as open as National Highways, using your example, I think that really does drive the right behaviours from the contractors.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I suppose another point is how safety gets integrated through the supply chain when it comes to things like this.
So I think for us at least, with safety, it's very important that we keep those communication channels open, because there's lots of different safety devices and adaptations and techniques that are finding their way onto the market. What you'll find is that you'll have Network Rail who will be trialling something, and if it's working well for them, the adoption for National Highways is far quicker and easier because we've learned how to do it.
Proven, yeah.
Pedestrian detection is one key area that I'm quite interested in, which is finding a way of the machine taking some of the responsibility away from the operator to identify if someone's encroached in the working zone. Now, that's not just a camera system. What I'm quite interested on is the learnings that we can get from that. So what behaviours, what trends are we identifying on sites which might be transferable from a construction site on a highway job to a demolition site? Good example I found recently was we had a machine that was constantly reporting incursions around sort of 12 o'clock time. And the reason for that was that the machine was actually situated near a walkway. So it should go without saying that when people are moving around for their break for lunch, that they're setting off the incursion zone. So what the team that were managing that situation were able to do is identify those trends and physically move that walkway to one side. Really, really simple solution, but something that was picked up and trended upon using the platforms and the data that we've got available.
Through the data. And it's funny because having the data is key. There's another, I suppose, the technology side of things when it comes to stuff like MachineMax, things like geofences, where you've got no-go zones and you're really trying to report on, as you say, these occurrences.
Well, again, as you say, those no-go zones, we perceive in this industry, construction as a whole, that we've got a challenge with red zone incursions. We don't really know where they happen, we don't really know when they happen, and we certainly have no idea of the scale of the issue that we've got. We have a traditional process of near-miss reporting, but do we all believe that all near-misses are reported accurately? I would speculate that we don't. So deploying technology so that we can accurately report on this and trend it is a real step change. If we know when they're happening, we know where, and we know by whom, then we can begin to do something about it. That's where I would see a real value in deploying data technology solutions like MachineMax on sites.
And that's it. And I suppose it's surfacing that data that's captured in a platform like MachineMax for anyone to access in real time.
Absolutely.
Along with all the other benefit.
Absolutely. Let me turn the question back on yourselves, because you are the technology provider and I'm a willing customer. Where do you see technology going with regards to deploying it from a safety systems perspective on demolition sites?
Yeah, so I think it's all about open and connectivity. We need to bring in as many different points of data and surface that in easy to use. We don't want it just to be one person accessing this data kind of every now and again. It needs to be in the forefront of everyone's face all the time to know exactly what's going on site.
I think that's really key in terms of making sure it's not just directed to one person.
Siloed, or because it happens all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. How do you address the challenges that I face and my customers face where suddenly they've had their eyes open to all of this data and it's almost data overload? We're getting pings for this and we've got metrics for that, and it's almost constant noise.
That's it. I suppose it's simplifying it, and that's what MachineMax is made to do. We're not requiring you to be a data scientist to be able to analyse lots of different spreadsheets and dashboards and graphs. It's kind of a simple to use platform that gives you the data that you want to see, not data we think you want to see.
I think that's really important. And one of the things that I've taken from my relationship with MachineMax is, whilst I might have a big fleet in the UK, you monitor a global fleet which is many, many thousands of units larger than mine. So I can begin to benchmark my own performance against a global average, which I think is really useful, just to benchmark myself really against how we're doing.
Well, that's it. And another great one we've been looking at recently is the whole idling instances on site. And I suppose very relevant to demolition because, when machines are decoupling the attachments and stuff like that, they will be idling. That again, you're never going to cut that out. But it's the idling instances that are over an hour or over 30 minutes that are really the ones we've been focusing on. And it's just staggering how many instances do occur on sites, even though they might have no idling policies.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to that point of providing the data that allows you to actually go and then do something about it.
I think that's really important. And the second aspect to that is offering the operator some of those prompts. So it's one thing having somebody in an office understanding that, okay, I've got 15 to 20 diggers and this is my number of hours idled in the day. That's really powerful information, but it's retrospective. Something that can be a real positive change is giving those real-time alerts. So I've got a problem now. I can actually do something about this now to make an instrumental difference on my construction site or my demolition site.
Yeah, and that's where we're seeing a lot more uptake in the alerts on the MachineMax platform. So SMSs or WhatsApp messages going to the operatives to, as you say, do something about it.
I think that's a huge tool, and particularly in demolition where we've recognised that we've got 40 to 50% idling, as you said earlier on, which is 10 to 15% above national average. I think that can be a really, really strong tool to deploy on demolition sites to say, listen, stop and think about what you're doing. This is the potential benefit you can have. Yeah,
and back again to operator behaviour. Just drives that, it's kind of carrot as opposed to stick. You're not shaking your fist at them. It's there's kind of more efficient ways of working.
May I ask you another question? So we've got a lot of operators out there who are traditionally going to work and potentially idling excessively or have the opportunity to make a saving. How do you and MachineMax feel about driver incentives, and do you see any examples across the globe where that's had a positive impact on driver behaviour?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of initiatives with clients in the past. So a big one that a lot of people are doing these days is the screen in the site cabin. So effectively a leaderboard where operators can peg themselves against each other.
Everybody loves a leaderboard.
Yeah, they do. Look, we're a competitive race. They kind of work against each other on a weekly basis and then are rewarded with vouchers or kind of other things.
I think that's a really good system. I don't know if they still do it, but I'm aware Eddie Stobart had a driver league in terms of fuel efficiency, and it was one of the key things that really drove a substantial change in their business because people owned the problem. And I think that's where we have a gap in the construction sector as a whole and the demolition. I don't believe the operators own the problem of fuel efficiency on the sites. So by creating that leaderboard, as you say, I think we're sharing that responsibility.
That's it. And then it drives the behaviour and then it just becomes the norm.
That's it.
So it kind of falls by the wayside. Cool. Well, that was really interesting, Chris, today. Thanks again for coming to chat with us. And look forward to hearing more of our podcasts in the future.
Owen, thank you very much and all the best.
Perfect. Thanks.